Hi everybody, I'm David. I'm the one who's been testing safes on this channel. A couple of months ago, I was approached by another journalist. This happens every 6 to 8 months. Some journalist is hoping to do a story about gun safes, gun safety, safe storage gun laws. Typically, when journalists approach me, they have preconceptions about how industry works. They've got a story they want to tell. They're hoping to get some good quotes. Usually, after I've answered 2 or 3 questions, the journalist discovers that industry doesn't work the way they thought it did. And it's usually about that time that I hear paper crinkling on the other end of the line. The journalist is flipping through the pages of a notepad looking for a question to salvage the interview. They got me on the phone. They want to get something. I warned this last journalist that might happen, and he said, "That's fine, let's give it a shot." We got on the phone. It was the same story. I could tell by some of the questions he was asking, he was hoping to follow up on things he didn't want to get into. He wasn't prepared for. By the end of the conversation, his questions took on a very familiar tone. Journalists are thinking in terms of top-down causality. They want to get to root causes. They're hoping to find that one party which, if they could expose in a very incisive, devastating piece of journalism, would be forced to have to clean up their act. I made sure this journalist understood there is no such thing. He would never find one party to blame in all of this. So what I'm going to do now is give you an overview of the industry. This will be for any would-be journalists, any gun owners out there who want to understand what's going on. Keep in mind the following things while I'm talking. I'm going to be talking about devices that are designed and manufactured in China. Also keep in mind that any company in the United States that is assembling components fabricated overseas is permitted to say made in the USA or made in the USA with outsourced materials. Also keep in mind that handgun safes are a separate industry. They are not made in the same kinds of factories that make actual safes. They're not made with the same materials or the same manufacturing processes. You might also keep in mind one other thing. From the time US corporations started shutting down manufacturing and pivoted to become importers of generic Chinese-made product, they set the stage for manufacturers in China to begin leveraging the import process to take ownership of a wide variety of different sectors of manufacturing. I'll come back to this. The first point I want to make, and I've got a set of bullet points in my mind that I may hit in some order or not. The first point I really do want to make is that nobody involved in the design or manufacture of handgun safes in China has ever handled a gun. That means nobody from the CEOs all the way down to the production floor workers, who might be young people, kids, girls, putting things together based on a set of instructions they've been given. None of these people have any idea what it means to live in compliance with gun laws, never mind safe storage gun laws. That leads to my next point. When one of these companies cobbles together another product, another design for a handgun safe, they're only guessing as to its possible use. They don't use these things in China. They don't have them in their homes. Unless you're a farmer who's gotten licensing to keep long guns for purposes of managing pest animals, you just don't own guns in China. Nobody in China has unfettered access to YouTube. So the industrial designer in China who is trying to design a new handgun safe can't anticipate the knowledge level of a would-be attacker when it comes to lock-picking video, safe cracking video, and that kind of thing. Okay, this is the environment of the industrial designer over there who's trying to conceive of how to design a handgun safe that will keep people out of it. It's a silly situation if you think about it. Back to my bullet points floating in the air here. How do you make the best, most educated guess you can as to how to design a handgun safe, if that's where you're working, that kind of environment? Well, you go on Amazon and look at what's selling. That's what they do. They look at what their competitors are selling there. They also go to Alibaba, which is the B2B e-commerce platform started by Jack Ma. They look at what their competitors are selling. That's where these companies in China are marketing their wares to importers. Okay, so they look at what the other companies are selling, the features that they're pushing, the quantities they're selling at, and at what numbers. And all of this leads to my next point. These manufacturers are designing handgun safes around features. Your typical handgun safe isn't actually a safe. It's a collection of features that are calculated to sell to the end user in the United States or elsewhere. This is kind of hard to articulate. To the industrial designer over there, there's actually confusion as to the end use of the product versus all of these features that American gun owners apparently want. It would almost seem that the American gun owner is less concerned with locking up a gun than having a box that allows you to open it in a multitude of different ways, which leads to my next point. One of the byproducts of designing handgun safes around apparently desirable features is that they typically offer too many methods for gaining entry. They may offer keyed access, keypad access, RFID access, biometric access, remote access by phone with a Bluetooth app. This is a violation of basic security principles. You cannot design a device intended to prevent unauthorized access by giving it a multitude of methods for gaining entry. Every system you incorporate into a device only introduces more points of potential vulnerability. You improve security by enhancing the functionality of fewer components, not by adding more components. Anyway, I'll get off that. Another byproduct of designing handgun safes around desirable features is that often these things are indistinguishable from toys. And I'm not saying that to be snarky sounding. I mean that literally. Let's say that the desirable feature the industrial designer is focused on is lightweight portability. It's nothing for him to choose all kinds of inappropriate materials. I looked at a handgun safe once that was made of ABS plastic. That's the plastic your Legos were made out of. I looked at one handgun safe that was made out of bamboo with hinges that were no different than the hinges you might find on a jewelry box. I looked at another product that was made of particle board with a plastic laminate. This is an example of an industrial designer just making really bad decisions, focusing on a desirable feature, lightweight portability. Another example would be latching mechanisms made of plastic. Injection molded plastic is cheap, easy to work with, and yes, it will help make a device lighter, but again, you don't secure a gun with a latching mechanism made out of plastic. So at this point, I am talking about industrial designers and engineers making bad decisions. So let me talk about engineering in some broad terms. Just because somebody has finished a program in mechanical engineering does not mean that person is prepared to step into doing physical security work. Yes, if you earned a degree in computer science, you're going to have to cover digital security. But when it comes to designing locks, locking mechanisms, just having studied mechanical engineering doesn't prepare you for that. Let me put this into perspective for you. Let's say you want to be a very good lockpicker, good enough to compete. You're going to accumulate a number of tools. You're going to dig into a lot of different locks, learn about a lot of different lock technology. It's going to take time. You could easily invest 4 years of study to get really good, the time it takes to earn a degree. Now, I'm not suggesting that an industrial designer with that background in mechanical engineering needs to do that. I'm just trying to give you an idea of just how much there is to learn if you really want to get into a specialty area. Something else that is not intuitive to people who aren't in this industry is that it's common to think of engineers as people who solve problems. It's more accurate to think of engineers as people who make things function. The problem solving they do often has to do with the minutia, the mechanical, electrical, electronic issues that have to be addressed in order to bring some design work to the point that you've got a functioning prototype that can be tested. Believe it or not, a lot of the engineering you take for granted in your life came about through the School of Hard Knocks. Design work, building, testing, failing, going back and starting over. It's not glamorous work. Also, it's important to keep in mind that Engineers have a lot of things on their plates, a lot of things they're thinking about that, again, it's just not intuitive if you're not involved in this industry or industry in general. Engineers are thinking in terms of identifying alternate materials that would be adequate, less costly. They're often charged with thinking in terms of down the road manufacturing processes. How can we double up the fabrication of hardware components that will be assembled into the finished product? They have a lot that they're thinking about. And I guess I need to talk now about the two basic directions your industrial designer can take in their work. You can design toward functionality, and you can design toward intended purpose. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I were an industrial designer and I was working on a new handgun safe, and I've come up with a design that I've got a prototype that opens and closes the way I want it to. The onboard programming works the way I want it to. It does what I want it to do. That does not mean that that handgun safe will fulfill its intended purpose, which is to prevent unauthorized access. I've been testing handgun safes since 2015. All of them function, and very few of them can fulfill their intended purpose. So how do we prevent the industrial designer, the engineer, from trying to reinvent the wheel? How do we prevent them from making disastrous mistakes if we can? We impose standards. In principle, standards ensure that products function and also fulfill their intended purpose. In practical terms, they're kind of the guardrails on engineers. A really good industrial designer is often designing to standards. They even often will have a personal library of standards, an area that they specialize in. I've invested in a library of standards because I've done some consulting. It was necessary for me to have these standards. Ordinary people do not want to invest in these. But the point I want to get at here is that industrial designers are not just coming up with a design and then after the fact asking themselves, I wonder if this thing meets any standards. It doesn't work that way. I need to pivot now and talk about standards. In the world of security, there are a couple of different meanings of the word standards that we throw around. We do a lot of code switching, and we don't clue people in as to what we're talking about. I'm going to give you two practical, real-world meanings of the word standards. And these are not textbook definitions, these are just my definitions. You can have standards that are an imposition on industry and standards that are an imposition on context. An example of an imposition on industry would be electrical wiring, electrical conduits, switches, electrical boxes, plumbing materials, all of the tubing and the piping, all the fittings, every pressure regulating valve, every compression tank, every air separator installed on a hot water heating system. All of these things have to be made to standards before leaving the factory and getting into the hands of the contractors. It's mandatory. The contractors are not standards people, they're not engineers. Their job is to know construction code. If they're laying in pipe, doing plumbing, they're following the Uniform Plumbing Code, which is health code. Now, an example of standards as an imposition on context would be, say, you've got a company, an organization that has to adopt better standards for storing and archiving documents. A government agency has to impose stricter access control to a facility. In this case, these entities will adopt standards and impose them on these contexts. And most of the time, standards are these elaborate constructs that are drafted up and they just float in the ether until some party adopts them and imposes them on context. Now, the reason I'm going on about standards should be obvious. Most of you have already divined where I'm going here. There are no standards imposed on the industry of handgun safes. Any manufacturer in China can cobble together any design, throw it up for sale on Alibaba, call it a handgun safe. Any importer can shop Alibaba for products to import. They can buy this in bulk, mark it up, throw it up on Amazon for sale. That's a handgun safe. And there's nobody around to say you can't do that. Now, I should make a couple of asides here. If you're a resident of California, you are subject to a set of standards that are imposed upon you as a gun owner and as a resident of the state of California. And I'm talking about California's firearm safety device standards and their gun safe standards. These were imposed by the DOJ in 2002. They have not been updated. When California's DOJ did this, they had no way of knowing that 3 years later, in 2005, YouTube would emerge, where people could watch lockpicking video, safe cracking video, all kinds of security hacking video. But they've had every opportunity to update those standards, and they haven't. In fact, in 2004, 2 years after the DOJ implemented their standards, ASTM International published their performance specification for youth-resistant firearms containers, F2456. They're good standards. They're decent. They're better than California's firearm safety device standards. But California's DOJ doesn't want to trouble themselves about this. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the practice of law has a lot less to do with reason, rational thought, and logic than you might think. It has to do with placating emotional needs. The firearm safety device standards were put in place to placate emotional needs. Partly of the people of California, partly of the activists behind the push, and also partly because of the lawmakers involved. They had their own emotional needs. For lawmakers, many of them have dreams of running for higher offices. They like the idea of being able to point to their resume one day and say, when I worked in the office of so-and-so, I was instrumental in making your community a safer place to live. Anyway, back to I have another aside I want to make here. Back when I first started testing these devices, I ended up with hundreds of these things. Goofy little latching mechanisms. I have looked at hundreds of these. At one point I had boxes full of these things taken from the various devices I was examining. I've looked at dozens of different motorized bolt mechanisms. I've looked at even more motorized latching mechanisms. I've looked at hundreds of spring release latching mechanisms like the one I'm holding. And I've looked at a lot of different solenoid locked bolt mechanisms. All of these goofy little mechanisms invented in China share something in common. These are not described in any standards. They don't exist. There are no standards describing this method of functioning here, the materials it needs to be made out of, the strength of those materials, nothing. These devices don't have any serial numbers on them. They don't have names. These are not like locks, like you could talk about pin tumbler locks, wafer locks, disc detainer locks, dimple locks. They're not like that. These things didn't even have any kind of a name or identifying number or anything. So what I did is I arranged these things based on their method of functioning, and I've put together a comprehensive description of these things. You can see it now on my website, handgunsaferesearch.com, on the page Handgun Safe Design. The point I want to make about these things is that there are millions of gun owners across the United States keeping their handguns in little handgun safes with these goofy latching mechanisms, which are not made to standards. That means none of these gun owners have any reasonable expectation that these things are secure. Anyway, back to my bullet points. In the same way that there are no standards imposed on this industry, the Chinese manufacturers of these products, again, they make most of these things. They don't feel any particular obligation when it comes to learning about what works and what doesn't work. I have been responsible for instigating 2 recalls since I've done this work. The first recall was a small handgun safe marketed by Rhino Metals. I exposed this contraption in a piece of writing online, and Rhino Metals made the decision to recall the thing. They brought the Consumer Product Safety Commission on board with that. The second device that I was able to get recalled was a really dangerous electronic handgun safe sold by Harbor Freight Tools under the Union Safe Company brand. After I posted that video on my old Vimeo channel, this was before I moved to YouTube, I started emailing Harbor Freight Tools, and I kept sending the link until finally somebody at a higher level of administration wrote back and said, all right, we got it. It wouldn't be for another 8 months though till they recalled the product. When they did recall the product, they brought the Consumer Product Safety Commission on board again. Great that they did that, but here's the problem with recalls. They're not very specific. They are product specific, but they may not itemize a defective latching mechanism, a poorly designed programming sequence, a cheap bypass cylinder. They don't itemize these things. So the manufacturers in China have no qualms with recycling the very worst design components I've looked at, incorporating them into new devices and putting them right back out on the market. And I see the same problem devices resurfacing again and again. Now, in the same way that there are no standards imposed on this industry, and these Chinese manufacturers have feel no obligations apparently to try to up their game and improve their products, there also aren't any regulations imposed on importers. An importer doesn't have to know anything about security, locks, safes, manufacturing. All they have to do is set up an Alibaba account to start importing stuff, set up their seller account on Amazon, maybe set up a little website, and they're in business. Importers also don't have any obligation to test products. In principle, the importer is the last line of defense in preventing a dangerous product from getting into the hands of a gun owner. In practical terms, they don't own the responsibility. They don't accept that they have any responsibility. So now that I'm talking about importers, I've got 2 more points that I need to make, and then I'll wrap this up. Now, you know, and I know that Chinese manufacturers are setting up bogus accounts on Amazon. They are burying negative reviews under 5-star reviews. And they're also making use of the Vine program, which I really think should be disbanded. Vine reviewers are idiots. I'm sorry, they are. They're in no position to be evaluating gun safety products. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about right now are the 2 most devastating tactics these Chinese manufacturers are using on Amazon. So let's talk about a hypothetical Chinese corporation, just a no-name corporation in China. They own 2 or 3 manufacturing facilities making generic product for export. They've got an advertising department, research and development department. They attend all of the trade fairs, and they've got 1 or 2 employees in the United States. This employee in the United States is going to be doing something interesting. He's going to be managing the importation of product. This corporation in China is going to be exporting out of China and importing to itself in the United States under another name. The products are going to end up in a 3PL, third-party logistics center. Now, this employee in the United States is also going to be responsible for trademarking brand names. These names are just names. They don't represent companies. They're just names. Now, why is he doing this? I'm going to describe for you an experience you have all had on Amazon. Some of you more than once. You went to Amazon to buy a thing. You didn't have a brand in mind, just a thing. A bar stool, a lamp, picture frames, whatever it was. Within a very short period of time, you ended up looking at 2 or 3 nearly identical items sold for nearly the same price. Each one sold under a different brand name. What's going on here? This is how these Chinese companies create for you the illusion that you have choices. What you didn't realize is that 2, if not all 3 of those products were made in the same manufacturing facility in China, and 2, if not all 3 of the brand names were owned by the same corporation. This is how these companies provide for you the experience that you're shopping. The longer you spend on Amazon, the more you click on those suggested items. If you keep at it, pretty soon Amazon is going to start doling out more brand names. Again, they're just names. They don't represent anything. Now, if you're like a lot of people, what you did is you ended up saying, well, see, I budgeted this amount of money and I need to get 4 of these, but this one costs $10 more or $20 more. But if I don't get that, then I'm going to kick myself, because if I get that, then I can do X, Y, and Z. Okay, I'll spend the money. And that's what you did. Admit it, that's what you did. Now for the dark side of this. If you're a gun owner who frequents this channel and you go to Amazon, search handgun safe, pistol vault, whatever, you're going to see a lot of product. And you're going to see prices ranging from the prices that were common 5 or 6 years ago, $300, $250, $200, all the way down to prices for nearly identical, if not identical products sold under different brand names. And these prices are going to be like $70, $60, $50. What's going on? These prices represent what would have been the wholesale cost to an importer shopping Alibaba. Let me show you something. This is a little generic handgun safe made by Tsunami Industrial in China. Believe it or not, the cost to manufacture this box in US dollars in China is somewhere around $5. The normal course of events is that an importer on Alibaba would buy maybe a couple thousand of these, probably for between 45 and $50 at that quantity. Then they may also have some customizing done, a label for it. Then they turn around, they put these things on Amazon at a markup, and that's how they make their money. Except not anymore. What's happening is these Chinese manufacturers are bypassing importers and selling directly to the end user at wholesale cost. The reason for this, there are a lot of reasons. One has to do with the inflation rate. It's not dropping fast enough. So people are pinching their pennies. Importers are not placing enough orders. The Chinese manufacturers just say, all right, we'll make up the difference and sell directly to the end user. Remember what I said at the outset of this video, that the Chinese manufacturers were able to use the import process to leverage themselves into taking ownership of far too many industries. This is the problem. They own too many different sectors of manufacturing, and they can cut out a lot of importers if they want to. And Amazon is not going to stop them from doing this right now because Amazon's dealing with issues. You may have heard of Temu, a Chinese e-commerce site. It's a place for all of these very same manufacturers to sell directly to you, the end user, at wholesale cost. They are actually taking a bite out of Amazon. Where does this lead? I don't know. I've heard some people claim that somehow we're going to wrest manufacturing from China and bring it back to the US. I don't think so. I've heard some people claim that Mexico might be the next manufacturing hub for the US. 63% of all the product moving on Amazon right now is made in China. I'm not making the number up. You can look that up yourself online. That number tells me Mexico is not a player. If I was going to predict the future, I would guess probably India is going to be the next manufacturing hub for US companies. They already make all of our pharmaceuticals in the United States. They make a lot of our medical equipment. They have a lot of coders, a lot of engineers, very skilled workers there. So I kind of think that's going to happen, but I could be wrong. Anyway, now you know why this industry of handgun safes is a mess. There are too many competing parties involved working at cross purposes, too many factors. The answer to the question, how do we improve this industry, is the answer to the same question, how do we wrest industry from China and bring that back to the US? And I don't see that happening. So at that point, I'm going to stop right there because I've given you more information than you wanted. And if you made it to the end of this video, I'm impressed. Thanks for listening.